Welcome back to the Deliberate Exchange podcast. I want to talk about words. It's funny the power that we attach to words and events. Three that stand out for me are sober, divorced, and fired. These three words once carried so much shame in me. And for a long time, I avoided them completely. I would say alcohol free instead of sober because I was afraid people would assume that I had a problem with alcohol and that somehow I was less than. And then I would say when I left the industry instead of saying fired because I feared people would assume that I was incompetent or deserved to be fired or whatever that was, that I wasn't good enough. And I would say we broke up instead of saying divorce because the weight of that word alone made me feel like a failure, like a scarlet letter branding me as someone destined to screw up every relationship that followed. And yet this was going against every piece of advice I speak so often. I tell people not to dim their light. Do not shrink your experiences. Do not let shame dictate how you show up in the world. And yet here I was giving more power to words and events and allowing them to dictate how I felt about myself, how I presented myself to the world, and even what I believed about my own worth. And then the truth is, words only have the power that we give them. Events only define us if we let them. I get to rewrite what these words mean to me, and so do you. For example, getting sober didn't mean I was weak. It actually meant that I cared about how I was showing up for myself. It meant I was willing to confront the very uncomfortable truths and to break conditioned habits and to choose clarity over an escape. And getting divorced didn't mean I failed. It meant that I was willing to walk away from something that didn't fit anymore because I refused to abandon myself in order to keep a relationship intact. And getting fired wasn't the end of my story. It was actually an amazing opportunity to completely rewrite it. It pushed me to step off of the comfortable, known path and forge my own. We can go on thinking that those words define us, or we can treat them as stepping stones, as fuel for our next steps and adventures, because we always have a choice. And that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about why these words and events shape us so deeply. We're going to talk about why those negative ones seem to stick the hardest. And we'll talk about how to redefine them so they empower you rather than limit you. And we're going to talk about how to stop dimming our light because of, frankly, outdated stories. So why do words and events hold so much power? Why does this even happen? Why do we attach so much meaning to these words or experiences that sometimes happened years ago? And the answer is simple. Our brains are wired to learn from pain. And so then the words become our internal programming. From the moment that we're even born, we absorb everything. As children, we're often told to not question what somebody says to us. If somebody tells us we're too much, we're too sensitive, or bad at something, we don't have the critical thinking skills to say, but that's just their opinion. Instead, we accept it as fact. It becomes part of our internal programming. And then the more that we hear it, whether it's from our parents or teachers or partners or society, the deeper it actually embeds. And then we reach adulthood and those words don't feel like opinions anymore. They feel like hard, cold truths. And then we start living in a way that proves them true. For example, if you're always told that you're not creative, you won't even try. If you were told you're bad with money, you might unconsciously sabotage financial success. If you were told you are difficult to love, you might settle for relationships where you're constantly proving your worth. Words don't just describe us, they can shape us. And so that's why we need to be really careful about which ones we end up holding on to. And events, they leave emotional imprints. It's not just the words that shape us, it's the experiences too, especially the hard and painful ones. Like when something unexpected, traumatic, or humiliating happens, our brains store it in this like mental danger file. Why? Because your brain's job is to keep you safe. If something has caused you pain before, it wants to make damn sure that you are never going to experience that pain again. That's why. Like that's why a single rejection can make you afraid to put yourself out there again. An opportunity of failure can make you feel hesitant to ever try again. A single heartbreak can make you guarded in relationships. But what's really important to remember is that it's not the event itself that defines us, it's the meaning that we attach to it. And the problem is that most of us don't even realize that we're actually doing it. And so there's also the talk about like why negative words and experiences tend to stick the hardest. Like my partner and I call it the one bad YouTube comment. Like I'm sure you've noticed this. Like somebody could give you 10 compliments in a row, but then you obsess over the one negative comment instead. And of course, there's a reason for that too. The brain prioritizes pain over praise. That's a negativity bias. Psychologically, we are wired to remember pain more vividly than pleasure because from an evolutionary standpoint, that's what kept us alive. Your ancestors needed to remember which berries made them sick, which paths led to danger, which people couldn't be trusted. And today that same mechanism is at play. Instead of like warning us about wild animals, is actually warning us about embarrassment and rejection and failure. So when something negative happens, your brain flags it as really important and replays it over and over and over again so you learn from it. But then instead of just protecting you, it just keeps you stuck. And then there's the dimming of your light. Over time, if we keep internalizing these moments, if we keep shrinking ourselves, we end up becoming smaller, quieter, less than. If we're told we're too much, we dim our passion. If we are told that we're too sensitive, we shut down emotionally. If we're told we're not good enough, we stop believing in ourselves. And then eventually we lose sight of who we really are. So how do we take back control? How do we rewrite these words, these stories, these experiences? Now that we know why this is happening, how do we start to break free? You can start by identifying the stories that you've been living by. Just consider, what is one sentence or belief that has shaped how I see myself? And then consider who told you that. Always consider the source. And then consider if it's objectively true. And then once you name it, like once you take it out of the dark of your mind and put it into the light, you see that it's actually not that scary, probably not that true, and you take away its power. I also want you to redefine the meaning. Because the truth is, every painful experience in your life has two stories. There's the one that keeps you stuck, and there's the one that sets you free. You get to choose which one that you believe. And then I want you to choose the words that actually empower you. So instead of thinking like, I'm not enough, you can consider I am whole as I am. If you're saying to yourself all the time, like, I always mess things up, I want you to consider I am learning and evolving every day. If you're saying I'll never succeed, try on I am building something incredible, because you are the author of your story. So make sure that the words that you're using build you up and don't break you down. You are so much more than the words that someone once gave to you. You get to decide who you are. If this resonated, send me a message, let me know. If you like this episode, please download it, share it with your friends and family if you think that they need to hear this message. And in the meantime, breathe it in, be deliberate, and please be good to yourself.